When the guns finally fell silent on the Western Front in 1918, Europe was left facing a scarred landscape and an even more battered military imagination. The First World War, with its endless trenches, barbed wire, and staggering loss of life, had shaken the very foundations of how wars were fought. Soldiers huddled in muddy ditches, waiting for the next barrage or the whistle that signaled an attack almost certain to be met by machine gun fire. The horror and futility of trench warfare became a defining symbol of the conflict, and with peace came an urgent question: how could such a stalemate be avoided in the future? The roots of Blitzkrieg reached deep into this interwar soil, nourished by both the bitter lessons of World War I and the technological ferment that had begun decades earlier. To truly understand the origins of this new way of war, one must first appreciate the revolution in military affairs that World War I unleashed. By many accounts, it was the largest transformation in the history of warfare, ushering in the so-called modern style of warfare. Almost every major military operation since then, in some way, traces its lineage to the innovations and disasters of that epoch. The problem of trench warfare was, at its core, a result of exhausted mobility. Advances in artillery and small arms had made open maneuvering suicidal, so armies dug deep into the earth for cover. The result was a vast network of static fronts stretching for hundreds of miles. Conditions in these trenches were grim mud, disease, and the ever-present threat of sudden death. For years, generals tried to break the deadlock by throwing ever more men and explosives at the problem, but the lines barely moved. Even as the war dragged on, there were attempts to escape this stalemate. New weapons, notably the tank and the airplane, were introduced in hopes of restoring movement to the battlefield. Yet, during the war itself, these innovations were not enough to fundamentally change the nature of the fighting. The technology was still in its infancy, and the doctrine to employ it effectively had not yet been developed. After the war, the limitations of trench warfare became a theoretical problem for military thinkers across Europe. The old ways had led to mass slaughter and strategic paralysis, and there was a widespread sense that the next war could not be fought in the same way. For the Germans, this was not just a theoretical concern. The Treaty of Versailles, imposed by the victors, placed strict restrictions on the size and composition of Germany's armed forces. Deprived of a large standing army and heavy weapons, German military planners were forced to think creatively about how to defend their country and, if necessary, wage war with limited resources. German military leaders, drawing from the lessons of the war and the writings of earlier thinkers, were determined to avoid a repeat of the trench-bound attrition that had bled their country dry. They looked back to the principles of movement and concentration articulated by figures like the 19th century Prussian general Karl von Clausewitz, whose concentration principle emphasized the power of forceful, focused blows to achieve victory. The Prussian tradition of decisive, mobile warfare, forged in the fires of the Napoleonic Wars, provided inspiration for what would become a new approach. Across the Channel, British military thinkers were also grappling with the legacy of the Great War. Sir Basil Liddell Hart, a British historian and strategist, emerged as a leading advocate for mechanized warfare and what he called the indirect approach. Liddell Hart, along with J.F.C. Fuller, argued that the catastrophic losses suffered during frontal assaults demanded a reimagining of tactics. They believed that mechanized forces tanks supported by infantry and artillery, all coordinated through modern communications, could achieve breakthroughs without the need for costly head-on attacks. Their ideas would find fertile ground among German officers searching for answers. It was not only theory that was changing. The industrialization of war, set in motion by the arms races of the late 19th and 20th centuries, had fundamentally altered what was possible on the battlefield. Mass production, improved transportation, and new explosives had already made World War I the most lethal conflict the world had ever seen. The integration of scientific expertise during the war, ranging from artillery and chemical weapons to aviation, armored vehicles, and radio communications, ushered in an era of total war, in which the full resources of society were harnessed for military ends. Between the wars, advances in technology continued rapidly. Engineers refined tanks, making them faster, more reliable, and better protected. Aircraft became more powerful and versatile, capable of supporting ground operations in ways that would have seemed fantastical a generation earlier. Artillery doctrines shifted to emphasize offensive tempo and firepower, aiming to support rapid movement rather than static defense. These innovations transformed not just how battles were fought, but how they were imagined. Yet not every nation drew the same conclusions from the carnage of the First World War. France, traumatized by the devastation wrought on its soil, chose to focus on defense. The Maginot Line, a massive system of fortifications along the German border, was the physical embodiment of this strategy, designed to prevent a repeat of the horrors of trench warfare. For the French, security lay in strength and immobility. Germany, by contrast, had few illusions about the possibility of another long, grinding conflict. Its economic and industrial limitations after Versailles meant that a drawn-out war of attrition would almost certainly lead to defeat. The imperative was clear. If Germany was to fight, it would need to win quickly and decisively. Into this environment stepped a new generation of German officers, men like Heinz Guderian. Encouraged by Adolf Hitler, who came to power promising to restore Germany's military might, these younger commanders pushed for innovation. Guderian in particular became a champion of independent panzer forces, armored units designed to operate with speed and flexibility. He drew not only on German traditions but also on the works of foreign theorists like Liddell Hart and Fuller. One of his key insights was the importance of radios in tanks, allowing for real-time coordination and the orchestration of complex maneuvers on the fly. The concept that would become known as Blitzkrieg did not emerge in a vacuum. It was shaped by the urgent need to avoid the mistakes of the past, the technological advances of the present, and the theoretical groundwork laid by thinkers across Europe. German officers analyzed the failures of World War I with characteristic rigor, seeking not just to adapt but to leap ahead. They recognized that tanks, mechanized infantry, artillery, and close air support, if properly combined and coordinated, could break through enemy lines and exploit the resulting chaos. This method of warfare, marked by speed, concentration, and surprise, offered a way to achieve decisive victories before an enemy could react. The origins of Blitzkrieg, then, lie at the intersection of history, technology, and necessity. From the muddy trenches of the Western Front to the drawing rooms of military theorists and the workshops of engineers, the seeds were sown for a revolution in warfare. The stage was set, and Europe would soon witness what happened when these ideas were unleashed upon the battlefield. Blitzkrieg, translated as lightning war, became synonymous with a new kind of battle, a sudden, concentrated assault that left adversaries reeling before they could organize a coherent defense. The term itself evokes images of speed and violence, but at its core, Blitzkrieg was much more than reckless aggression. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of machines and men, weapons and willpower, designed to avoid the slow destruction of attritional warfare. The Germans aimed to win quickly and decisively by combining tanks, aircraft, and fast-moving infantry, all coordinated to strike with maximum force at a single point. The objective was to punch through enemy lines, encircle opposing forces, and force surrender before the enemy could regroup. The defining feature of Blitzkrieg was its reliance on combined arms tactics. Instead of deploying tanks, infantry, artillery, and aircraft separately, German planners fused them into a single, concentrated force. This approach drew heavily on the principle of concentration, inspired by Karl von Clausewitz, which emphasized delivering one overwhelming blow at a decisive point. The shock value of such an assault was immense. Armored spearheads smashed through the weakest sections of enemy defenses, supported by mobile artillery and closely coordinated airstrikes. Once a breakthrough was achieved, mechanized infantry and reserve forces poured through the gap, encircling and isolating enemy units before they could retreat or be reinforced. Tanks led the charge in this new style of warfare. No longer lumbering curiosities as they had been in World War I, they had evolved to become faster, better armored, and crucially, served as shock weapons at the very tip of the spear. Their ability to traverse rough terrain, crush obstacles, and withstand small arms fire made them ideal for breaching fixed defenses. But tanks alone could not secure victory. Their success depended on a supporting cast: artillery to suppress strong points, infantry to eliminate pockets of resistance, and engineers to clear mines or obstacles. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of Blitzkrieg was the use of air power. Aircraft were not an afterthought, but an integral part of the battle plan. Dive bombers, especially the infamous Stuka, became instruments of terror as much as destruction. Their screaming dives and precision attacks targeted enemy positions, supply columns, and communication lines, paralyzing defenders with fear and confusion. The psychological impact of these aerial assaults was often as significant as the physical damage they caused. Panic spread quickly when bombs fell seemingly out of nowhere, and defenders often broke ranks before the panzers even arrived. Speed was everything. The Germans understood that a slow advance gave the enemy time to respond, mobilize reserves, and organize a counterattack. By moving rapidly, sometimes covering dozens of miles in a single day, Blitzkrieg forces aimed to outpace enemy decision-making and sow chaos behind the front lines. Radios became the invisible threads binding these fast-moving units together. Each tank, truck, and command post was equipped with radio sets, allowing for real-time communication and coordination across the battlefield. Orders could be relayed instantly, adjustments made on the fly, and opportunities seized as soon as they appeared. This level of connectivity set the German army apart from its opponents, whose units often relied on slower, less reliable means of communication. Surprise was another cornerstone. Blitzkrieg operations were meticulously planned to strike where the enemy least expected. Deception, feints, and sabotage all played their part, with German intelligence working to uncover weak points and gather vital information. When the attack came, it was not necessarily the size of the force that mattered, but its ability to concentrate power at the critical spot and overwhelm defenders before they could react. The first blow was intended to shatter the cohesion of enemy units, creating panic that spread through the ranks and made coordinated resistance difficult, if not impossible. Yet Blitzkrieg was not merely a matter of machines and movement. It required a new way of thinking about war, one that prioritized flexibility, initiative, and improvisation. Commanders at all levels were expected to recognize fleeting opportunities and exploit them without waiting for orders from above. This doctrine of Auftragstaktik mission command allowed for swift decision-making and kept the momentum of the attack alive. The structure of the German panzer divisions reflected this ethos. Each division was a combined arms formation, containing not only tanks but also mobile artillery, mechanized infantry, engineers, and logistics units. These self-contained groups could operate independently or together, adapting to the changing demands of the battlefield. The testing ground for Blitzkrieg tactics appeared before the world's eyes in the Spanish Civil War and, later, in the opening campaigns of World War II. Here, German units experimented with the tools and doctrines they had painstakingly developed. Field exercises revealed the importance of coordination and the devastating potential of concentrated armored thrusts. The lessons learned were applied ruthlessly. When the time came, the Germans unleashed Blitzkrieg on Poland and France, achieving rapid victories that stunned the world. These early successes gave the new method an aura of invincibility, and its propaganda value was not lost on Nazi leaders. The term Blitzkrieg itself became a symbol, both for the German public and their adversaries, a promise of unstoppable force and inevitable triumph. The psychological dimension of Blitzkrieg was as carefully calculated as its physical blows. German attacks were designed to induce panic and confusion, causing the enemy's command structure to collapse from within. The thunderclap arrival of tanks, the shriek of Stuka sirens, and the relentless advance of infantry created a sense of hopelessness. Many defenders, believing themselves surrounded or cut off, surrendered without a fight. The Germans intentionally targeted enemy armed forces and logistical hubs, not civilian populations, in their initial attacks. The focus remained on breaking the will and capability of the opposing army, not on wholesale destruction for its own sake. Communication and intelligence served as the nervous system of Blitzkrieg. Morse code and radio chatter crackled across the front as commanders coordinated attacks, relayed reconnaissance from advanced patrols, and called in airstrikes on newly discovered targets. German espionage and sabotage teams sometimes operated ahead of the main force, disrupting enemy communications and supply lines. This constant flow of information allowed the attackers to maintain the initiative and respond to developments with unmatched speed. Reserves played a critical role in exploiting breakthroughs. Once the main line had been breached, fresh units rushed forward to widen the gap, deepen the encirclement, and prevent any chance of recovery. Blitzkrieg doctrine emphasized maneuver over sheer firepower, seeking to outflank and envelop rather than destroy outright. The combination of speed, surprise, and coordination made these encirclements devastatingly effective. Isolated pockets of enemy resistance were left to be mopped up by following infantry, while the armored spearheads pressed relentlessly onward. The key to Blitzkrieg's early success lay in its unity of purpose. Every component, tanks, artillery, infantry, aircraft, engineers, worked in concert, guided by a shared understanding of the mission and the flexibility to adapt as conditions changed. The doctrine proved that victory could be achieved not by grinding down the enemy over months or years, but by making war a matter of days or even hours. The world watched, fascinated and horrified, as this new form of warfare rewrote the rules of battle. And while the term Blitzkrieg would become as much a tool of propaganda as a precise military doctrine, its impact on the conduct of war was unmistakable. The lightning war had been unleashed, and nothing on the battlefield would ever be the same. The human cost of this campaign was immense. In just over a month, Poland was defeated, its territory carved up and occupied. The price was staggering. Historians estimate that around 6 million Poles would die during the years of occupation, including both Jewish and non-Jewish victims. with approximately 70,000 lost in the battles themselves during the 1939 campaign. The shock of Blitzkrieg was not just military but deeply personal, families uprooted, cities shattered, and the very fabric of society torn apart. In this sense, the Lightning War was as much a terror for civilians as it was for soldiers. By 1941, the thunderclap of Blitzkrieg had become unmistakable, a sound that echoed far beyond the front lines, capturing the imaginations of generals, politicians, and civilians around the world. As German armored columns pushed deeper into hostile territory and the war expanded in both scale and ferocity, the limits of this much-vaunted lightning war began to emerge. The myth of Blitzkrieg, dazzling in its early triumphs, would be both challenged and transformed as World War II unfolded, leaving a legacy that would shape military thinking long after the guns fell silent. The question of whether Blitzkrieg was truly a revolutionary doctrine or simply a product of circumstance and necessity has fueled debate among historians for decades. Some argue it represented a brilliant new strategy, a synthesis of speed, surprise, and technology that left slower-moving adversaries reeling. Others contend that Blitzkrieg was less a deliberate doctrine than a pragmatic response to Germany's chronic shortages of men and material. Facing a war of attrition they could not hope to win, German planners sought quick, decisive victories to avoid being worn down. In this view, Blitzkrieg reflected Germany's strategic predicament as much as any overarching theory of warfare. Revisionist voices have even questioned whether Blitzkrieg existed as a formal doctrine at all, suggesting instead that it emerged from a creative reinterpretation of World War I manuals, modernized for a new era. Whatever its origins, there is little doubt that Blitzkrieg's initial impact was extraordinary, yet the system was designed for a specific kind of war, fast, concentrated campaigns that relied on surprise and mobility to achieve rapid results. It was not suited to the grinding, attritional struggle that soon developed on the Eastern Front or in the deserts of North Africa. The very strengths of Blitzkrieg's speed, coordination, and shock became weaknesses when faced with determined, resourceful foes who learned to adapt and endure. The Allies, stunned by the early German victories, quickly set about developing countermeasures. They mobilized larger and better-equipped forces, not only to match German prowess, but to overwhelm it with sheer numbers and firepower. Information became a weapon as well. The Allies invested heavily in intelligence and reconnaissance to track enemy movements, aiming to deny the Germans the element of surprise that had been so crucial to their early successes. On the battlefield, armored reserves were positioned to counterattack at critical moments, blunting the impact of German breakthroughs and forcing the panzers into costly battles of attrition. The days when a handful of divisions could punch through and race unchecked into the enemy's rear were coming to an end. This process of adaptation extended beyond tactics on the battlefield. As the war progressed, the Allies absorbed the lessons of Blitzkrieg even as they found ways to defeat it. Nowhere was this more evident than in the planning and execution of the Normandy landings in 1944. Here, the Allies combined mobility, firepower, and close coordination between land, air, and sea forces in ways that echoed and in some respects surpassed the achievements of German arms in the war's early years. The focus on combined arms, rapid exploitation of breakthroughs, and flexible command became hallmarks of Allied operations for the remainder of the conflict. Blitzkrieg's influence did not end with the defeat of Nazi Germany. In the post-war years, military thinkers in the United States and other countries pored over the records of the early German campaigns, seeking to distill the essence of Blitzkrieg for their own doctrines. The debate over its true nature continued, with some viewing it as a coherent, innovative doctrine and others as an improvisation born of necessity. Yet the allure of Lightning War proved irresistible. American military doctrine after the war increasingly emphasized mobility, flexibility, and the integration of different arms and services, ideas that would eventually find their fullest expression in the airland battle doctrine of the late 20th century. The belief that rapid, decisive operations could deliver victory became a guiding principle for military planners worldwide. With this enduring legacy, however, came myths, some born of wartime propaganda, others of post-war analysis. One of the most persistent is the idea that tanks and aircraft alone set Blitzkrieg apart from the warfare of World War I. In reality, the difference lay less in technology than in the way forces were organized and employed. Tanks and aircraft had appeared on the battlefields of the previous war, but it was the integration of these weapons with infantry, artillery, and engineers, all linked by real-time communication, that gave Blitzkrieg its edge. The myth that tanks alone were responsible for German victories obscures the deeper innovations in command, coordination, and operational art that underpinned Lightning War. The enduring fascination with Blitzkrieg has also shaped perceptions of war itself. For many, the image of panzers racing across open country, supported by screaming dive bombers and relentless radio traffic, became the very symbol of modern mechanized conflict. This vision has influenced not only military doctrine but also popular culture, reinforcing the notion that speed and technology can overcome all obstacles. Yet the reality, as the war itself demonstrated, was far more complex. Blitzkrieg succeeded spectacularly under certain conditions but faltered when confronted by deep defenses, resilient adversaries, or the logistical challenges of prolonged campaigns. In the years after World War II, the Western Allies, and especially the United States, adapted elements of Blitzkrieg to fit their own strategic needs. The emphasis on combined arms, rapid maneuver, and the exploitation of breakthroughs became central to training, doctrine, and operational planning. Over time, these ideas would influence conflicts far removed from the fields of Europe, from Korea to the Gulf War. The promise of lightning war of swift, decisive campaigns that could bring about rapid victory remained a tantalizing ideal, even as history repeatedly reminded commanders of its limits. Today, the legacy of Blitzkrieg endures in both myth and reality. The lessons of its early successes and later failures continue to inform military thinking, reminding commanders and strategists of the need for adaptability, coordination, and a clear-eyed assessment of strategic realities. Perhaps most importantly, Blitzkrieg stands as a cautionary tale, a reminder that no doctrine, no matter how dazzling in its conception or execution, is immune to the relentless pressures of war or to the ingenuity and determination of those who must face it. The true legacy of Blitzkrieg, then, lies not in the fleeting victories of 1940, but in the ongoing quest to balance speed with endurance, innovation with prudence, and myth with hard-earned experience.